That morning, my savings account showed a balance of zero. So did the checking. So did the money market account my wife Carol had opened the year before she passed. Then my son called. He didn't say hello. He said, "Dad, before you panic, just know that everything is going to be okay." I looked at my phone. I looked at the empty driveway where my GMC Sierra had been parked since Tuesday. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and said, very quietly, "I know. At 64, I don't move the way I used to. My right shoulder reminds me every morning that I spent 31 years swinging a framing hammer for Whitfield Construction in Knoxville, Tennessee. Some mornings the shoulder is stiff before I even open my eyes. I've learned to give it a few minutes before asking anything of it. That's been my routine since I retired 3 years ago. Wait, breathe, let the body catch up with the day. I used to wake up at 5 because the job site demanded it. Now I wake up at 5 because the habit never left. I shuffle to the kitchen, fill the percolator Carol bought at an estate sale in 2009, and stand at the window while it heats. She always said the percolator made better coffee than any machine we ever owned. I've never tested that theory with another machine. Some things you just don't replace. I had planned that morning to drive out to the lumber yard on Highway 11 and pick up cedar planks. I've been building raised garden beds in the backyard, something to do with my hands, something Carol always wanted but we never got around to. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the back door, walked through the laundry room, pushed open the door to the garage. Empty. I stood there long enough that the motion sensor light clicked off. I pressed the button again. The light came back on. The Sierra was still gone. I walked to the workbench. The spare key was missing. The garage door clicker I kept on a nail was gone. The lockbox I used for the truck title and insurance card, the small gray one bolted to the shelf, had been pried open. Clean, not forced. Someone who knew where it was. My stomach did something slow and cold. I went back inside. The filing cabinet in the hallway was open. Third drawer. The one I never locked because Carol used to tease me about being paranoid if I did. The deed to the house was gone. The property tax certificates. The folder marked accounts with the bank statements inside. The old laptop I kept on the writing desk had been unplugged and taken. Even the power cord was gone. My phone buzzed. My son Derek. I answered on the first ring. Derek. "Hey, Dad." He sounded tired. Not guilty, just tired. "I can explain everything." "Where's my truck?" "It's safe. I borrowed it." "You borrowed it without asking." "Dad, listen." "Where is it, Derek?" A pause. Then, in the background, a woman's voice. Low. Saying something I couldn't make out. My stomach tightened further. That was Renata, Derek's wife of 2 years. "We're in Georgia," Derek said finally. "Renata found a place for us. It's a fresh start, Dad. We needed—" "What did you take out of my accounts?" Silence. "Derek, Renata said that money was basically ours anyway, that you were going to leave it to me eventually, so—" She said that. Another pause. "Dad, you don't understand how much pressure we've been under." I looked out the kitchen window. 2 doors down, my neighbor Raymond was walking his retriever the same way he did every morning. Same pace, same route. The world was carrying on like a Tuesday in March. My world had stopped. "Derek," I said, "I need you to put Renata on the phone." He didn't. Instead, he said, "We'll pay it back, all of it. We just needed a head start. You've got the house, you've got your pension, you'll be fine. The deed is gone from my files." A longer pause this time. "Renata handled some paperwork. It was just to clean things up legally," she said. I set the phone on the counter, not hung up, just set it down. I stood there for a while. I'm not sure how long. Long enough for the percolator to go cold. Then I picked the phone back up. Derek was still talking. I said, "I'll call you later." And I hung up. Then I went to the closet in the back bedroom. The one that used to be Derek's room when he was 12. The one that still smelled faintly like the cedar blocks Carol hung to keep moths away. I moved a stack of old blankets. Behind them was a gray fireproof safe the size of a carry-on bag. I hadn't opened it in over a year. My fingers found the combination without thinking. Some things the hands remember better than the mind. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside was a thick brown envelope. Across the front, in the handwriting of an attorney named Sylvia Marsh, were the words, "For Harry Cobb, do not open unless necessary." I sat down on the floor of that closet, right there on the carpet, and held that envelope in both hands. Carol had been gone for 2 years and 4 months, but she had known Not specifically, not the details, but she had known something about the shape of what might come. She had known it before I was willing to see it. I called my oldest friend, a man named Gene Albright, who spent 27 years as an investigator for the Knox County DA's office before his knees and his doctor told him to retire. He picked up on the third ring. "Harry, I need you." He didn't ask me for details over the phone. He said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes," and he was. He drove the same beige Dodge Ram he'd owned since the second Bush administration. The passenger side mirror was held on with electrical tape. He'd been meaning to fix it for 6 years. Some things just become permanent. He came inside, looked at my face, and said, "Tell me everything in order." So I did. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he looked at the envelope. "You ready to open that?" "Yeah." We spread everything across the kitchen table. What was inside that envelope represented 11 months of quiet, careful work that Carol had set in motion during her final year, after a conversation she and I had about Derek and Renata that I had mostly tried to forget. There were certified copies of a deed held inside an irrevocable living trust. There was a letter from Sylvia Marsh explaining that the property had been transferred into the trust 18 months prior, which meant it could not be sold, transferred, or encumbered by anyone, including me, without the trustee's written authorization. The trustee was not a family member. It was a licensed fiduciary named Patricia Holcomb, whose contact information was paperclipped to the front of the binder. There were also account documents for a secondary checking account Carol had set up in the trust name, the account I had quietly transferred my pension deposits into over the past 14 months. Not because I had been certain something like this would happen, because Carol had asked me to. She had said, "Just in case." I had done it the same way I did most things she asked me, without fully understanding her reasoning until later. There were bank authorization letters, certified copies filed with the county recorder's office, and one small USB drive taped inside the back cover. On it, according to Sylvia Marsh's letter, were digital backups of every document, time-stamped and notarized. Gene looked through everything methodically, the same way he used to process a scene: slow, thorough, nothing skipped. "You've got everything," he said. "Looks like." She was smarter than both of us. She was smarter than everyone in any room she ever walked into, I said. "It just took me longer to understand how much." Gene picked up his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to a woman named Detective Sandra Pruitt with the Knoxville Financial Crimes Unit. The second was to Patricia Holcomb, the trustee, who answered from her office and told us she had received no requests, no paperwork, and no contact whatsoever from anyone regarding my property, which meant whatever documents Renata had submitted or was planning to submit had not yet been processed or had already been flagged. Detective Pruitt arrived within the hour. She was in her 40s, precise in the way people get when they've spent years explaining complicated financial crimes to juries who would rather be somewhere else. She shook my hand, looked around the kitchen, and said, "Let's start with the bank." The bank confirmed what I already suspected. Someone had logged into my online accounts, the ones Renata had helped me set up 2 years ago, because I had still been printing paper statements, and she had said it would be easier for me to manage everything digitally. She had been right. It had been easier. It had also given her access she never returned. 3 large transfers, 1 the previous Thursday, 2 on Friday, all to an account I didn't recognize. Detective Pruitt photographed the screen. She didn't say much, but on the way out of the branch she said one thing that stayed with me. "Mr. Cobb, I need you to know whoever did this moved very fast. People who move that fast almost always make mistakes." The mistake came faster than I expected. The deed transfer Renata had filed with the county recorder's office was rejected the following morning. 2 problems. First, the notary seal on the power of attorney she had used was registered to a notary in Chattanooga who had surrendered her license in 2021. Second, the property records showed the house inside a trust, and the transfer form she had used didn't account for trust-held property. It was the wrong form entirely, pulled from a website that hadn't been updated since 2018. Gene, when Detective Pruitt called to tell us, let out a long breath. "Amateur hour," he said quietly. "She's not an amateur," I said. "She's impatient." Same result. By Thursday, Detective Pruitt had confirmed that the wire transfers had triggered automatic holds at the receiving bank due to the amounts and the speed of movement. Fraud detection, she explained, the systems are designed to catch exactly this kind of acceleration. Some funds were already frozen. The rest had been transferred to a third account, but investigators in Georgia had already identified it. My truck was located on Saturday morning outside a storage facility in Marietta. Derek had been using it to move furniture into an apartment he and Renata had leased under her name. When an officer approached him in the parking lot, he didn't run. He stood there with a moving box in his hands and looked, according to the officer's account, less like someone who had gotten away with something and more like someone who had been waiting to get caught. Detective Pruitt called me herself to tell me, "Your son is cooperating," she said. "Okay, that matters, Mr. Cobb." "I know." She paused. "There's something else." I heard papers moving. Renata Aldridge has been investigated once before. A complaint in South Carolina. Her former in-laws. The case was dropped when the family declined to pursue it. Another pause. Derek may not have known the full picture of who he married. I sat with that for a long time after she hung up. "There's a hardware store on Sutherland Avenue I've been going to since I was 22 years old. Same family. Third generation now. The youngest son, Marcus, took it over from his father about 8 years back. I drove there the day after they found my truck. Not because I needed anything, because I needed to be somewhere that felt like itself." Marcus was behind the counter. He looked at my face and said, "You okay, Mr. Cobb?" "Working on it. You need anything specific today?" "Just the cedar planks I've been putting off." He nodded and walked me back to the lumber section himself, the same way his father used to. We didn't talk about anything important. We talked about wood grain and drainage, and whether raised beds do better with 2-inch or 3-inch planks. On the way out, he handed me a bag of deck screws I hadn't asked for. "On the house," he said. I didn't argue. That night, I sat on the back porch for a long time. The garden space was still raw dirt and good intentions. I thought about the last argument Derek and I had, back in the fall, about money, about his business that kept almost working, about Renata's certainty that I had more than I needed and should be doing more with it. I had said, calmly, that it wasn't her decision to make. She had smiled at me the way people smile when they think you don't understand your own situation. I should have paid more attention to that smile. I thought about Carol. About the afternoon she had asked me to drive her to Sylvia Marsh's office, and then to the bank, and then to the county recorder's office. She had held my hand in the car on the way home and said, "I'm not trying to be morbid. I'm trying to be practical." I had told her she was always practical. She had laughed and said, "One of us has to be." The next day, Jean came by with 2 cups of coffee from the shop on Gay Street. We sat on the porch steps because neither of us felt like being inside. "You going to press charges?" he asked. "Against Derek?" "Against both of them." "That's not up to me." "Partially it is." I wrapped both hands around the cup. "Renata, yes. I'll cooperate with everything they need." "Derek," I stopped. "Derek is my son. He's also not 20 years old. He knew what he was participating in." Jean didn't say anything. "But I think Renata knew things about his weaknesses that I didn't, and used them." I looked out at the yard. "That doesn't make him innocent. It just makes the whole thing more complicated than I want it to be." Jean nodded slowly. "That sounds about right." The preliminary hearing was held on a Thursday morning at the Knox County Courthouse. It was a building I knew. I had done renovation work there in 1998, replaced the window frames on the north face. I remembered the limestone being harder than expected and the foreman complaining about the schedule. I had never imagined walking through the front doors on the other side of something like this. Jean sat beside me in the gallery. A few rows ahead, I could see the back of Derek's head. He had hired his own attorney. He was cooperating with the state's investigation into Renata in exchange for reduced charges related to his involvement in the transfers. His attorney had negotiated that carefully. Renata sat at the defense table in a gray blazer that looked expensive. She held herself straight, chin up, the same composure I had watched across countless family dinners, while she offered opinions about my financial situation in the polite tone people use when they think they're being subtle. The prosecutor began methodically. A bank investigator presented the transfer records. A digital forensics analyst walked the court through the login history of my online account's IP addresses, timestamps, device signatures, every access mapped to a tablet registered to Renata's email address. The county recorder's office sent a representative who explained, clearly and without drama, why the deed transfer had been rejected. He described the expired notary license. He described the incorrect form. He described the trust documentation that made the property untransferable without Patricia Holcomb's authorization. The courtroom was quiet, not because people were surprised, because the evidence was simply that clear. Then the text messages. The prosecutor read them onto the record from a screen at the front of the room. They had been recovered from a cloud backup during the warrant process. Renata to Derek. Your dad will never figure out the trust is the problem. Just let me handle the paperwork. Derek to Renata. Are you sure we should do this? Renata to Derek. Derek, we've been through this. It's his money or ours. Those are the options. Derek to Renata. What if he finds out? Renata to Derek. He's 64 and still uses a percolator. We have time. The room stayed quiet after the prosecutor stopped reading. I looked at my hands. I thought about the percolator on the kitchen counter. I thought about Carol buying it at an estate sale because she said it made better coffee. I thought about the fact that Renata had been in my kitchen enough times to know exactly what sat on my counter and had filed it away as evidence of my limitations. She had been wrong about a lot of things, but she had been right that I used the percolator. I just wish she had been wrong about that too. Gene leaned over and said nothing. Just put his hand on my arm for a second and then took it away. That was enough. Derek was called to testify. He walked to the stand looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week, which I suspected was true. He answered every question directly. He confirmed the transfers. He confirmed the login access. He confirmed that Renata had told him the trust could be challenged after the fact, that it was a technicality, that his mother's attorney had overcomplicated things unnecessarily. He said he had believed her. The prosecutor asked, "Did you believe her because you thought she was right, or because you wanted her to be right?" Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Both." It was the most honest thing I'd heard him say in 2 years. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand slowly. The shoulder was aching from the cold morning. I took the oath and settled into the chair. The prosecutor asked me how long I had worked in construction. I told her 31 years. She asked what I had done. I told her I had built things, houses, commercial buildings, a church once, a school twice, and more decks and additions than I could count. She asked what I had learned in 31 years of building. I thought about it. Then I said, the foundation matters more than anything you build on top of it. You can fix a roof, you can replace a window, but if the foundation is wrong, eventually everything above it fails. She nodded. Did your wife understand that? I looked at the water glass in front of me. Carol understood it better than I did. She was the one who made sure the foundation was solid. I just had the good sense to listen to her. The prosecutor thanked me. Renata's attorney cross-examined me briefly. He suggested that I had willingly shared my account credentials with my daughter-in-law. I confirmed that I had. He suggested that this implied permission to manage the accounts. I said, managing an account and emptying it are different things. I gave her the password to check whether a bill had posted. I didn't give her permission to become me. He had no further questions. Before sentencing, the judge allowed statements. Derek stood and said, quietly and without excuse, that he had made choices he was ashamed of and that he intended to spend whatever time necessary making them right. He looked at me once while he spoke. I didn't look away. Renata stood and said she had acted in her family's best interest and had been misled about the legality of the process. Her attorney had advised her to keep it brief. She did. The judge sentenced Renata to 42 months in federal custody, restitution in full, and 5 years of supervised release. Her prior record in South Carolina, though unresolved, had been entered as pattern evidence. She received the full weight of what the law allowed. Derek received a suspended sentence, 3 years of probation, community service, and was ordered to complete financial fraud counseling. The judge noted his cooperation, his clean record, and what she described as evidence that he had been in a relationship with someone practiced at identifying and exploiting trust. After the hearing, outside on the courthouse steps, Gene handed me my truck keys. My Sierra had been released from evidence the previous week. I had driven it twice since then and was still deciding how I felt about it. You want to get lunch? He said. I want to go home and work on those garden beds. He nodded. Good answer. I drove home through Knoxville with the windows down. It was mid-April and the dogwoods were finishing their bloom. Carol had always timed things around the dogwoods. If they were blooming, she'd say, spring was making a promise it intended to keep. At home, I changed clothes and spent 3 hours in the backyard, cutting cedar and driving screws and building something that would hold soil and grow things. My shoulder complained around hour 2. I ignored it. In the weeks that followed, Derek called twice. The first time I let it go to voicemail, the second time I answered. We talked for 12 minutes. He apologized in a way that sounded like he had practiced it and then abandoned the script halfway through, which I thought was probably more honest than getting it perfectly right. I told him I needed time. He said he understood. I believed him, which was something. Jean and I started fishing on Sunday mornings when the weather held. We weren't very good at it. We both understood that the fishing was a reason to sit beside water and not talk about difficult things for a few hours, and that this was its own kind of necessary. One morning, maybe 6 weeks after the hearing, Jean asked me what I missed most. I assumed he meant from before everything fell apart from the normal life I'd had. I said, Sundays when Derek would come over and we'd watch whatever game was on and order pizza and not talk about money or plans or any of it. Gene cast his line out. You think that can come back? I don't know. I reeled mine in slowly. Some things you can rebuild. Some things you can replace with something that works just as well. And some things I stopped. Some things you just carry, Gene said. Yeah. We sat there for a while longer. Eventually, I started answering Derek's letters. Not right away, and not with forgiveness packaged neatly in a bow, because that wasn't the truth and Derek deserved the truth more than he deserved comfort right now. But I answered. I told him about the garden beds, which had come out better than expected. I told him Carol would have had opinions about the spacing of the tomatoes. I told him that I thought about what she would have said about all of this, and that I believed she would have been heartbroken and practical in equal measure, which is how she was about most things. In the last letter I sent, I included a photograph. Derek, maybe 8 years old, standing on a construction site I had taken him to on a Saturday because the babysitter had canceled and I had a deadline. He was wearing a hard hat that was 3 sizes too big and holding a level and grinning the way children grin when they feel important. On the back of the photo I wrote, I always thought you'd end up building something. I still do. Take your time getting there. He didn't write back for 3 weeks. When he did, it was 1 page. And most of it was about the community service hours he was completing at a food bank and how the work had started to feel like something instead of punishment. At the bottom he wrote, I found that picture in my wallet from years ago. Didn't know you had a copy. I think about the hard hat. I folded the letter and put it in the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, next to the other things I don't want to lose. My neighbor Raymond stopped me one morning while I was bringing in the mail. He had watched the police vehicles, watched the investigators come and go, and had clearly been waiting for a moment to say something. He walked over and said, Harry, I don't know exactly what happened over there, but I know it wasn't what people were saying. What were people saying? He winced slightly. Doesn't matter. I should have come over sooner instead of speculating. He extended his hand. I'm sorry I didn't. I shook it. Raymond, I said, you're walking your dog over here right now. That counts. He looked relieved. His retriever sat down on my foot like she belonged there. Detective Pruitt stopped by the garage one afternoon in late May. She had heard I was doing volunteer carpentry work for Habitat for Humanity on weekends. Word had gotten back to her through Jean, and she wanted to see how I was doing. She stood in the driveway and looked at the raised beds, which by then had tomatoes and beans and 2 rows of basil. Carol always said she'd grow if we ever got around to it. You did all that yourself? She said. Mostly. Jean helped me level the frames. How are you sleeping? I thought about it honestly. Better than I expected. She nodded. The restitution order is moving. Most of the funds should be recovered within the year. I wanted you to know that. Thank you. She looked at the garden again. Mr. Cobb, can I tell you something I don't usually say? Go ahead. Most people in your situation, they either fall apart or they spend years angry. You didn't do either. That's not common. I picked up a pair of pruning shears from the porch railing. I had a good foundation, I said. Took me long enough to understand that, but it held. She smiled and left. That evening, I made coffee in the percolator. I drank it standing at the kitchen window the way I always do, watching the yard go from afternoon light to the softer kind that comes just before the sun drops behind the ridge. Carol's chair was still on the porch. I hadn't moved it. I thought about what I might have done differently. The honest answer was less than I expected. I had trusted the wrong people with small things, and they had used those small things to attempt large betrayals. The protection hadn't been mine to build. Carol had built it, quietly and ahead of schedule, because she loved me in the practical way that doesn't make a lot of noise. If there is one thing I would tell anyone sitting across from me right now, someone who might be where I was before that Tuesday morning in March, it's this. The people who love you best are sometimes the ones who quietly prepare for the worst while hoping alongside you for the best. Don't wait until you need that envelope to be grateful it exists. And if someone in your life is building something quietly to protect you, let them. That's not fear. That's love doing its most serious work.